Tonight, we're going to speak about Shabbos and pregnancy, from before conception through birth and the postpartum period, focusing mostly on the days or weeks right before birth, and then labor and delivery is going to be our main discussion. I'd like to focus a little bit on all of the different people that are involved in labor, including the mother herself, obviously, the husband, myself as the physician, a support person like the mother's mother, a doula, and also the nurse who's taking care of the patient. And I have a few questions, at least jump-off questions about each one of those. Right. If we have time, we're going to talk about earlier in pregnancy. And if we really have time, we'll talk about the woman who's trying to conceive and receiving a treatment that crosses over with Shabbos. To begin, my little view of things is I myself have been going back and forth to the hospital on Shabbos for the past 30 years, on and off, on any given Shabbos. I still find myself jittery when driving on Shabbos. I feel the weight of Shabbos when I get into my car. I try to prepare my car before Shabbos if I have an idea that I will be going to the hospital. It's interesting that I know of a family that walks by my house specifically to see if my car is in the driveway on Shabbos to find out whether their children have gone into labor or not. Additionally, there have been times where I am not prepared for Shabbos, thinking that I will not be going to the hospital, when somebody knocks on my door. And I have a patient who did knock on my door. I drove them to the hospital, asking them if they would like me to turn down the radio, because the radio was on very loud, because previously I had driven home in the middle of the night and had to make sure that I would stay awake, but didn't prepare my car for Shabbos. And they tolerated that radio the entire way to the hospital. And after they gave birth, they sent me a beautiful gift with a card in it and said, next time, hopefully the radio will be lower. It does bother me a little bit that I've had patients who seemed too relaxed in regard to Shabbos. In going to the hospital on Shabbos and worrying about the issues of Shabbos. Most of my patients are very, very, very concerned, although they have already some guidance of what to do for Shabbos. That's my little introductory statement.
So let's get right to the questions.
Okay, so let's move on. The mother, okay. First, I would just like to ask you, could you explain why a woman, the sources, why a woman in labor is allowed to go to the hospital on Shabbos? She has never traveled on a car on Shabbos in her entire life. This is the first time that she's going to do it. What gives us permission to travel to the hospital on Shabbos?
Good. When it comes to Hilchos Shabbos, there are different categories, different stages, different categories, different tiers of cholim. I think we've touched upon this. I think we touched upon it when we discussed fasting on Yom Kippurim, on Tisha B'Av, different levels and stages of choli. The most intense, the highest level of choli is that of chola sheyesh bo sakana. A chola sheyesh bo sakana means that their life is at risk. They are experiencing, whether it's an illness or a medical situation, a medical emergency, that could cost them their lives. The halacha in such a case, when we're dealing with the category of chola sheyesh bo sakana, is, as we know, the mitzvah of PUAH nefesh tells us that you break all halachas, all the Torah, with very few exceptions, in order to save the life. The 3 cardinal sins does not include breaking Shabbos, and therefore, when you have a chole on Shabbos that is in a situation of an emergency situation, a life-threatening situation, so they are not only permitted but obligated to break Shabbos in order to save a life. That is the mitzvah of PUAH nefesh. So before I go any further, I think it's important for everyone to understand this, that we may take it for granted that childbirth, you go in, you have a baby, mommy's good, daddy's good, baby's good, Baruch Hashem, doctor's good. But maybe, Dr. Herman, if you want to share a story or two from your angle where sometimes mommy is not always good. And it reminds us that even though, Baruch Hashem, many of the text messages that we receive when babies are born is that mommy's doing great, it's not always the case. And mommy can sometimes be in grave danger. I mean, I'm sure you have such cases.
So certainly we do. Thank God they're not very common. Just to give you a statistic or some concept, the United States itself is the leader in maternal mortality compared to other industrialized nations. About 13 or so, I think that statistics out of every 100,000 people who get pregnant will die in relation to childbirth. Maybe not right at the time of childbirth, but within the postpartum period, before childbirth or during childbirth. So, I could argue and say, how much sakana is considered sakana? If it's only 13 out of 100,000, that doesn't sound like such a big sakana. That is one question, and I learned a little bit that Gemara doesn't. We don't see statistics and numbers in Gemara the way that we look at them today.
That's right.
So I'll ask you that question. It seems like it's so little, but people give birth at home.
Yeah.
People say, I don't drive. Why do you need to travel to the hospital? Just listen, make it usher to travel to the hospital, and everybody is forced to deliver at home.
Right. So that's the next point. The next point that we have to understand is, what is a chole sheyesh bo sakana? Chole sheyesh bo sakana, someone whose life is in danger. What is the threshold to determine someone a chole sheyesh bo sakana and not? There is a sugya in Yuma. I believe it's PUAH. And there the Gemara is talking about pikuach nefesh, Shabbos, breaking Shabbos, Yom Kippurim, etc., to save a life. And the Gemara says something very important, that when it comes to saving one's life, ein holchin b'nefashos achar harov. You don't look at the majority and say, oh, well, since majority of people in this situation make it out alive, make it out all right, so therefore we're not going to classify this case as a life-threatening situation. Says the Gemara, no, ein holchin b'nefashos achar harov. We don't look to the rov. Even if there's a minority of people who are in grave danger, whose lives are at stake, we'll consider it life-threatening. Tosfos on the spot says, not only do we say ein holchin b'nefashos achar harov, even in a case where there's a sveka, a double suffix, we'll break Shabbos in order to save them. Tosfos gives an example of a building that falls, and there may or may not be someone alive under the rubble. So it would be muktzah, it would be usher to go ahead and move the rocks. But for pikuach nefesh, so you'd be allowed to do that. Tosfos writes, even in a situation where there's 2 svekos, suffix number 1, you don't even know whether there's someone in that building. And suffix number 2, even if you do find someone in that building, maybe he's dead already. I don't know that I'm going to save a life. Nevertheless, Tosfos says, when there's even 2 svekos, you still exercise the pikuach nefesh. You wave the pikuach nefesh banner, and you go in and try to save the life. If you take these concepts and you put it to modern day medicine, you do not have to be dealing with a statistically proven subset of people or cohort of people whose lives are in danger, but rather the spectrum is quite wide, and rabbanim and doctors can be quite creative in terms of what the potential danger could be, whether it's infection, whether it's even a broken bone. There was a case in the summer a few years ago where a boy broke a bone on Shabbos, and they decided not to do anything because it's just a broken bone. well, maybe it was Friday night, and he slept on it. They didn't take him to the hospital. He got an infection that night, and Shabbos morning, they had to airlift him from camp to the nearest hospital because he had an internal bleed, internal infection, all from a broken bone. So therefore, a person breaks a bone on Shabbos. We don't typically assume that that's a life-threatening emergency, but you have a Rav, and certainly a doctor, but a Rav has to be familiar with the situations on Shabbos. What could be life-threatening, even if it's a little bit remote. Now, the general concept, one easy way for the layman to make this assumption or this determination is if it was a weekday, would I go to the hospital? Would I think twice to go to the hospital? So if on a weekday, I wouldn't think twice. I would call the doctor, I would get into the car, I would go to the hospital. So on Shabbos, I have to do the same. Now, there are different levels, but that's always a good litmus test. Now, it's important to mention before we go on that when we're dealing with Chilul Shabbos, the only time a Jew is allowed to be actively involved in Chilul Shabbos is when there is a sakanas nefashos, when there is a life-threatening situation. So a woman in labor, back and going full circle, a woman in labor, even though, yes, Baruch Hashem, most of the mommies that give birth make it out alive and well, Baruch Hashem, since childbirth is potentially harmful to one's life and could take one's life. Therefore, it is classified as a chol sheyesh b'sakana, which would allow us to break Shabbos when necessary. I guess I'm sure the following questions will hit on the points of when is it necessary, when can a non-Jewish person take over. I'm sure some of those questions will address that.
First, I want to ask you the definition of sakana. Is that only including mortality, that the patient is at risk for dying, or does that also include harm, like permanent harm that could come to the patient without death being in the equation?
That's a very good question. The Gemara calls that sakanas aver. Let's say if I don't treat this on Shabbos, so I won't die, but my finger.
No, you'll require a hysterectomy.
Let's say it's a hysterectomy. So the aver, your whole uterus is at stake, is it right? A person cuts his finger. So the doctor said, the guy in shul, the doctor says, if you want your finger, go to the hospital now. The person says, I don't care about my finger, right? Who said I'm not going to die, so my finger will fall off. So I'll have 9 fingers instead of 10. So that's a machlokas called sakanas aver. That's a machlokas. My Rabbi, Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik, his father, Rabbi Aaron, I believe he quoted a Meiri, felt that sakanas aver is the same thing as sakanas nefashos, and you break Shabbos even for sakanas aver. You have the same sugya in a case where a person puts a gun to your head and says, kill someone else, right? So we know that we have to take the bullet. We can't kill. So let's say he says, I'll shoot you if you don't, cut off their finger, or I'll shoot you. So do we say, or cut off sakanas aver? Do we say that is that? Let's say your one aver is at stake. Are you mechuyev to put up your life for one aver? So the shach there in Kufnan Zayin in your day discusses it. My Rabbi Soloveitchik felt it was sakanas nefashos.
Okay, but when I think of these things, I think about potential sakana. Okay, so just to give you a case, an hour before Shabbos, someone is, we don't consider them sakana nefashos. They're not in labor, nothing happened to them. 59 minutes before Shabbos, their water breaks. And we say, get yourself together and go over on Shabbos. I don't think that they're really in sakana at that minute. They're not in sakana the next hour. 5 hours down the road, my sakana definition starts changing because the risk of infection starts going up. But certainly for the first hour of Shabbos and the second hour of Shabbos and the third hour of Shabbos, I don't really think of them. I think of the potential of sakana, but not in sakana.
Right.
And now I'm asking them to go to the hospital, light candles, go to the hospital, even though that sakana has not sunken in yet, and my sakana feeling is 4 hours away or 5 hours away.
So that sounds to me like you're hitting another very important Shabbos related question, which is very fundamental, a very fundamental question when you when you're trying to balance the interplay between medicine and Shabbos and halacha. And that is when the Torah tells us that you're allowed to break Shabbos to save a life. What is the nature of our permissibility to break Shabbos? The way that the Gemara phrases it is Shabbos hutra or dechuya. What that means is, do we assume that Shabbos doesn't exist? Shabbos doesn't exist. Everything becomes mutter on Shabbos. Once you're faced with danger, everything becomes mutter. Or do we say no? Not everything becomes mutter, but whatever is standing in your way to achieve success, to achieve life, to achieve health, whatever you're allowed to push that away. But that and only that. In other words, I'll give you a good example. A person's in the hospital, a woman's in labor, right? So anything that she needs, she's a chol she'ein b'sakana. Anything that she needs for her health, she can do, even if it's going to cost her chil Shabbos. And let's say she wants to watch TV, let's say she wants to do some other malacha, some other muktzah item related, other malacha that has absolutely nothing to do with her health, right? You could say maybe even watching TV will calm her down, this and that. Let's say it has nothing to do with the labor. So is she allowed to do that? Is she? I'm a chol sheyesh b'sakana, so that will depend. If the chol sheyesh b'sakana gives you this heter, this hutra, so then you can do whatever you want, because it's like Shabbos doesn't exist now that you're in that state. But we paskin that Shabbos is dechuya, that you can do anything that stands in your way, getting to the hospital, opening the electronic door, right? Whatever you need to do, that's what you do. But something beyond that would not be acceptable. So going back to your question, person's water breaks an hour before Shabbos. You know that eventually, right, they're going to need to go to the hospital. So maybe if you held that Shabbos is dechuya, so there's a way that we could theoretically get out of breaking Shabbos. I could go to the hospital right away before Shabbos and get there, check myself in, and I won't have to be in a car on Shabbos, right? If the time comes, it's okay, right? If it's Shabbos comes and I'm home and I need to get there, then it's okay. But if I could circumvent it, I think it's best to go to the hospital, if you know that it's imminent. So go to the hospital. Whereas if Shabbos were hutra, we would say, no, stay at home and whatever you want. I think halacha l'maisa, within the hour. I think if you know that within 24 hours, let's say, because you're going to need to see them within 24 hours after the water breaks. So you know that they're going to be in the hospital over Shabbos and you can get there before Shabbos, you should do that.
I would like them delivered by 24 hours, not seen by 24 hours.
So then for sure. So then
I'm saying if nothing's happening by 2 or 3 hours after the water is broken, we're starting to initiate labor. But at the time that they're going to the hospital, I don't consider them yesh bo sakana at that point. And they're still going on Shabbos when they have not entered sakana yet.
Right.
Is anything required for a patient to do to prepare for Shabbos when they get close? Do they have to do anything? Should they be doing anything to prepare? And we'll talk about what they bring to the hospital in a few minutes. Should that be all set up? Should they alert everybody? Should they arrange for childcare? And one of the big questions that I had recently when we started thinking about this year is a patient, I'm sitting, obviously where I live, in the 5 towns, Winthrop Hospital where I deliver, and a patient says, it's 2 weeks before my due date. Is it okay if I go to Lakewood for Shabbos? Okay, so what is that question? We already learned, at least I already learned, you don't have to move closer to the hospital because Shabbos is coming. You could stay in your own home, right? You could even drive by another hospital where babies are delivered to get to the hospital which you're supposed to be delivering in. But now it's 2 weeks before a due date, and you're not saying I'm going to move even further away from my house for Shabbos. And if I go into labor, I'll drive that extra distance back to my house and then on to the hospital. Is it usher to go away for Shabbos under those conditions when you're approaching and in the zone?
Right, it's a good question. We take for granted that you don't have to move to the hospital, but to an area close to the hospital. But there are modern day poskim who hold that really you should be put up by a hotel near the hospital. Should you go into labor, you could just walk right in. I don't paskin like that.
You
maybe
do that each Shabbos
Shabbos.
starting at 36 weeks, 37 weeks, because you do.
Yeah, I personally don't tell people that they have to do that. That was never my Masorah. My Rabbi never obligated people to go, but I have seen it in writing from, I don't want to quote names now because I didn't see it recently, but it's names that are major poskim and who are not strangers to the contemporary medical's discussions. Nevertheless, as you mentioned, at least for this year, for my Masorah, accurately, that you do not need to make arrangements to stay near the hospital for Shabbos so that you shouldn't have to drive. Going away for Shabbos, the question is that a prudent decision? Are you making the right decision? Going to Lakewood for Shabbos when your doctor is in Winthrop, I mean, it just sounds like a bad idea. It sounds like a bad idea.
I'll give you an example. They say, well, it's my brother's Afrov.
It's not. Here's the halachic answer. I don't think it's usher. I don't think it's usher.
It's just not a good idea. Is what we've.
Good idea. We had a Shabbaton that one of my wife's aunts and uncle arranged. All the cousins, all the aunts, all the uncles, everyone. We're talking about more than 100 people, Baruch Hashem. And it was scheduled for November 30th, which was a Shabbos. And it was out, I forgot, I don't even know where it was. And my wife and I, we were nervous because my wife was in her 9th month. If we go away for Shabbos, what's going to be? We're going to drive back, this and that. We decided not to go. It was a very hard decision because my wife was close to her family and everyone was there. And we had a baby Shabbos morning. I don't know. I don't remember if you were there, Dr. Herman.
I don't know.
Wow. So these things happen. Babies are born on Shabbos. So I think you have to make a prudent decision. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where there's not going to be appropriate care to deliver you and to so a person. But if you're in Lakewood, I'm sure you could find someone who will help you deliver. In terms of preparing for Shabbos, I know you mentioned preparing for Shabbos. I'll just, because you said we'll talk about what you want to bring. One thing I think is very important that the patient should be in touch with the doctor is about filling all the paperwork out from before Shabbos. I think that might be a no-brainer nowadays. But come Shabbos, the patient shouldn't have to write anything. Writing is an Isser D'Oraisa. So the patient shouldn't have to write. The patient shouldn't have to sign. The patient really, if they can avoid handling insurance documents and different paperwork, if you could avoid it by submitting it beforehand and having it in the system, matov manoim, wonderful. If it has to be done, I tell people not to sign on Shabbos. Can't imagine they're not going to deliver your baby because you didn't sign.
In today's world, there's no paper anymore, and it's signing on a tablet rather than on a piece of paper. I don't know if that makes any difference. And I'm very happy to say that in our hospital, there's never an issue of a patient having to sign anything on Shabbos.
Good.
Okay.
Good.
Okay. Question. Case.
I'll just tell you where paperwork comes out. Let's say they deliver on Thursday, Friday, whatever the policy is, that they get discharged. So this is really a shaila for the doctor. Can a doctor sign discharge papers or whatnot? Is that also electronic? I mean, there's a lot of paperwork. No, there's signatures.
Everything is now signed on tablets.
Okay, good.
Not signed on tablets. Okay, case. Early labor before Shabbos. Okay, a patient is seen, they call on the phone, I think I'm in labor. They're sent to the hospital before Shabbos. Of course, everything takes a long time. They get discharged before Shabbos, but they look at their watch and they can't make it home before Shabbos starts. They will get home after the 18 minutes.
Yeah.
What do they do?
This is a very important question. It's not just relevant to this sugya. It's relevant to travelers in general on Shabbos. It's very relevant to doctors and residents who work on Friday. I had a balabas in Queens who was working he had a Shomer Shabbos residency in Westchester, and the head of residency was unfortunately a self-hating Jew. So he told the head of residency that he has to leave on Friday at a certain time to get back to Queens for Shabbos. And she said, "Why? What time is Shabbos? What time is candlelighting?" He said, "I don't know, 4:30." So she said, "You can leave at 4:29 because you won't work on Shabbos." So and she wouldn't let him leave a minute early. And she was very smart. Show a Shabbos residency. I'll respect your Shabbos, but you can't leave a minute before. So doctors, residents, and travelers who decide to go to Lakewood for Shabbos, and you find yourself stuck in a lot of traffic. So this is really a question that's relevant every Erev Shabbos in a case where where you're not going to make it home on time. One of the most important things to remember in this Shaila is that as long as you are still in the window of time called Bein Hashmashos, it's after Shkia, so it's after the 18 minutes. So Shabbos has officially begun, but you still have a certain amount of time before nightfall sets in. Let's say it's a half an hour, let's say it's 20 minutes, a half an hour, 35 minutes, 40 minutes. That window of time is called Bein Hashmashos. And the halacha is that you are allowed to ask a goy to do anything for you during Bein Hashmashos, certainly if there's a need. And therefore I tell people in these situations, whether they're in traffic and they see that they're not going to make their destination, pull over in a safe place, hide the keys to your car, and get into an Uber and ride the rest of your way home. That way, during the Bein Hashmashos, the guy will be taking you, and that's acceptable. In a case where you're in the hospital and you see Shabbos is approaching, you're not going to get back in time before the 18 minutes, but you will get back before nightfall. So then definitely a guy could take you. Let's say you won't even be able to get back before nightfall. Let's say they discharge you at 9 o'clock.
Happens all the time.
So they discharge you on Shabbos. So here, the Rabbanim, not everyone, but many Rabbanim, I've heard many Rabbanim say the following, and this is no offense to doctors or hospitals, but maybe you'll agree. The hospital is not a safe place for a person who's not sick. The amount of germs, staying around in the hospital with no place to go, it's not the most ideal of places to be hanging out, especially when you're dealing with a woman that just had a baby. And you have a baby, and you have a newborn. So given the circumstance, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that from a medical perspective, given the fact that we don't want the newborn baby, the mother, even in a case of false labor, this happens all the time, the false labor, there's no baby yet. Well, they tell you to come back tomorrow, come back the next day, whatever it may be. So many Rabbanim say that if you come in Friday night, they tell you at 12 o'clock 1 o'clock in the morning, nothing doing, go home. According to most Rabbanim, you're allowed to get into a cab, not a Jewish person is not allowed to drive you, but an Uber with a non-Jewish driver can take you back home, even on Shabbos, as long as it's within the Tchum.
So let me ask you a question with a little admission. What happens, and this is a real case. Many years ago, I'm walking out of the hospital, I think it was Yontif or Shabbos, and I see that there's a frum person getting discharged. And it turns out that frum person was there getting evaluated for preterm labor of twins. And I saw her there, so I said to her and her husband, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" It wasn't my patient. She goes, "I'm here from Pittsburgh, and I'm staying with relatives. And I was in preterm labor. They just treated me and they said I could leave." And I said, "Where are you going to? Where are your relatives?" They go, "They're in Lawrence." So I said, "Where in Lawrence are they?" And they said, "They're on Lakeside Drive South." And they go, "That's funny. I live on Lakeside Drive East. You're talking about 5 houses down from me. I'm driving there right now." So I actually took them and dropped them off. And now when they come and visit, I see them all the time. But, is that the right thing to do? Or should they have called Uber? I don't even know if there was Uber at that time. Should they have called a taxi better than me heading in, bringing them to where they brought them?
So I think that, when people do things for the right reasons, when people do things l'shem shamayim, and people live a Torah life, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives them siyata d'shmaya. So you made the right decision. You made the right decision to take them home. And the reason why is because your driving, let's assume that your driving was done beheter. Since you're driving, a doctor has a special heter to go home. We could talk about this a whole different time. Hatzalah, doctors, whatever, they have a reason to go home. You don't want them to, you want them to come initially. So if they don't go home, they're not going to come initially, right? Especially in your situation where, let's say you're not in the hospital, but you're on call. But it's possible that a patient could call you and get to the hospital before you, and they'll miss you, right? Exhibit A. Exhibit A.
Happen.
So, and therefore, and no one's going to know, no one will know that patient, that the doctor was taking his time, right, and didn't get to the hospital, not because he just didn't have enough time, but because he didn't want to go. He was in the middle of something, he didn't want to go, right? In order to see to it, and especially if he knew that he wasn't going to be able to drive back, he would tell his patient after Shabbos, I'm sorry, I couldn't make it. I couldn't make it in time. I had one of my other partners delivered you. I'm sorry. So in order to get you to the hospital, to make sure that you're able to deliver that patient, we have to let you come back. So since you're able to come back, you're able to go and come back, your chazara was permissible, so that you can take a yid home, since your driving is permissible. They wouldn't have been able to ask a taxi driver. That's a fascinating question also. Let's say a taxi driver is driving anyway. Is it better to take the Jewish guy to the hospital to save him who's driving on Shabbos, not from guy, than a goy? Okay, that's a separate shayla. But you were driving beheter, you could have done it. The only thing that you can't do is overshoot your house to drop them off, turn around and come to you. That you can't do.
Right.
But if you pass them on the way, if you pass their house on the way, or you drop them off at your house, that's not an issue. It's totally fine that you took them home.
Great. I don't know if she's listening right now. Irit Lang, who is a doula from Crown Heights and takes care of and participates in a lot of my patients' births, sent me this story, this scenario. So I'm going to read it to you. A 32-year-old gravida para 3, so a woman with 3 babies, at the day before her due date, is having moderate contractions at 4 p.m. on Erev Shabbos. She decides to go to the hospital before Shabbos because she knows that on Shabbos she's going to be going into labor. She's seen and triaged at the time of lichtbenching and is 3 centimeters, and she's sent home from the hospital. The hospital is across a bridge, and her Rav said she could go home in a car, but her husband can't go home with her. She will not leave the hospital without her husband. The doctor offers induction of labor because they're staying there, and the patient chooses induction of labor because she was stuck in the hospital on Shabbos. Just want to know, did she first have to go before Shabbos? I think we already answered that question. She went early knowing that she was going to go into labor on Shabbos in anticipation of Shabbos. But in this case, it's sort of a little bit backfired on her. Okay, so just if you have a few comments on the husband not being able to go home with her, choosing to have induction of labor because she is stuck there already and now it's Shabbos time.
I don't understand. There are many parts of the shayla that I don't understand. Why isn't the husband allowed to come home with her?
Okay, so I don't know.
I'll give you another. In general,
yes.
A patient, we know patients should not be, certainly a woman in labor should not be alone. So pre-labor, actually, a woman should not be alone. She needs an advocate. She needs someone with her, whether she's in the hospital, whether she's in transit. She needs to be with someone else. I don't understand why the husband's not allowed to travel with her.
Mm-hmm.
Furthermore, you mentioned that she has 3 children, right? So sometimes children at home is a reason why a father would be allowed to return. Let's say the woman gives birth on Shabbos morning. They leave the children with whomever. They leave the children with the grandparents, with the neighbor, whatever it may be. And then the baby's born early Shabbos morning. The mother's going to be there the duration of Shabbos. It's a summer Shabbos. It's a long Shabbos. Now, it could be that the kids are in great hands. Bubby and Zadie, grandma and grandpa will take great care. But it's possible that this crept up on us and we knocked on our neighbor's door in the middle of the night and said, here's the kids, we're out of here. That is actually a heter for the father to go home on Shabbos, again, with a nachri, not a Jewish driver. He can't drive himself. But a father, I would, if the husband would ask me before Shabbos can I go home on Shabbos knowing that my kids are at the neighbors for the whole summer Shabbos? I would say yes. You're allowed to take a non-Jewish driver and go because your kids who are also cholim she'ein bo sakana, right? Children are classified as cholim she'ein bo sakana. Depends on, at what age do they graduate into normal, life, but certainly up until 6, 7, they're cholim she'ein bo sakana, and you're allowed to violate the rabbanans for that. So a husband's allowed to get in the car with the guy, as long as the guy's driving, the guy's opening the door, the guy's closing the door, not the Jew is just being driven completely, very passively. He's allowed to go home. So I don't understand. There was one thing that you mentioned with the bridge. That might be a shaila of whether there's a tchum, whether there's an issue of a tchum. So maybe the husband's not allowed to go home because he can't, that Rav holds that the bridge would create a tchum issue. And if there's a tchum issue, then I hear maybe it would be problematic for the husband to accompany his wife, but I think it would be a sakana to send the wife alone. I don't think that's a good idea that she should travel alone.
Okay, next case, a patient who's admitted before Shabbos and she's totally unprepared for Shabbos. What do I mean?
Again, what was the beginning of the question?
She's admitted in labor before Shabbos, and they didn't realize they were going to be there for Shabbos, and now they have a problem. Okay, they don't know what to do about lighting candles on Shabbos and making kiddush on Shabbos. They have nothing with them. Okay, and they're sitting there 5 minutes before Shabbos going, oh my God, what do we do? Now today we see all these little electric lights. They are LED lights. From what I understand, you're not supposed to make you light candles on that. How does a person go about lighting candles? I'm going to tell you it's 10 minutes before Shabbos.
Good. So you're right that many postim would not allow you to make a bracha on a light bulb which is not incandescent. That being said, I personally have a Kabbalah from my Rabbi Soloveitchik, who has a Kabbalah from his father, Rabbi Soloveitchik, that the nature of the mitzvah of Hadlakas Neros is for the illumination, the radiance, not for the fact that you need an actual fire. An incandescent bulb is fire, and therefore it could even qualify as an Eish for Havdalah. And you need Eish for Havdalah. So therefore, if you're going to use a bulb for Havdalah, the only option is an incandescent bulb. But he felt fundamentally that the leiros for Shabbos, for Leil Shabbos, is that there should be light in the house, that you shouldn't trip on anything, it should beautify the table. So therefore, even if there's no incandescent bulb, I tell my balabatim that if you're stuck in a situation where you have only the LEDs, you could even make a bracha of Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvah b'tzvon l'hadlik ner shel Shabbos. If you don't have that, you could, if you don't even have those, your Bikur Cholim room wasn't stocked before Shabbos, or you have so many, or maybe it was Motzei Yom Kippur, Motzei Tisha B'Av, everyone's giving birth, so all of the candles were taken. You could even turn off the electric lights and turn them on, if your room is not so complicated that it has a sensor or whatever, motion detector. If it has the switch, you could turn it off, make the bracha, and turn it on, and that's what Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik Paskin you could do even on an LED.
Could you make a shliach to light candles for you at home?
So this is the thing. You can't really make a shliach for you to light candles for you because you're not going to get any of the hana in the house.
Right.
You're not going to get the hana there. You need the hana yourself. If there's going to be people in your home, so they need to light for them. If the husband and wife are separated for that Shabbos, she's going to stay in the hospital and he's coming back to be with the children. So what I tell people, and this is a common case, you have 6 kids, 7 kids. The husband can't stay with his wife the whole Shabbos. They have the whole family at home he needs to take care of. So what I'll tell them is like this. The wife should light by herself in her room, and she should have in mind not to be yotze with him. Meaning she's right, I mean, she's making her own hadlaka. The husband has in mind to be yotze him and his children, and not his wife. Right. They light separately. She in her hospital room, he in the home, and that way they could both be makayim the mitzvah of Ner Shabbos.
I'm making kiddush. They have no wine. There's nothing there. There's a refrigerator. It has some soda in it. It has some juice in it, but there's no grape juice. There's no wine.
The halacha is if you don't have wine, so then on Friday night you can make kiddush on challah.
2 pieces of bread wrapped up in cellophane.
Yeah, yeah. There's a tshuva from the Meshiv Davar. In the tshuvas of Meshiv Davar written by the Nitziv, someone quotes his grandfather, and someone asked the Nitziv's grandfather, he says, how come when I go to your grandfather's house and I come late, he gives me 2 slices of bread, and he says, make hamoitzi. He asked the Nitziv, doesn't the Zayda know that you have to have lechem mishnah? You have to have 2 whole pieces of challah. You can't make 2. So the Nitziv answered, he said, the Zayda knows exactly what he's doing. He said, my grandfather holds that shalem is subjective. And since when you came, these are 2 whole slices. For you, that's shalem, that's lechem mishnah. If you were sitting at the table when they began, they started as whole loaves and you saw them being sliced. So anyone at the table, that can't be used as lechem mishnah. But if someone wants to take 2 slices of bread that wasn't sliced in front of him, that's lechem mishnah. That's the Minchas Yitzchak actually paskins lahalacha. So if a person's in the hospital, they can take 2 slices of bread, make kiddush on them, make hamoitzi. That's kiddush and lechem mishnah right there.
So I'm just reminding you, it's 18 minutes before mincha. So we're definitely not going to get through all of this. Next case, real labor starts on Shabbos. So Shabbos, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. The wife turns to the husband, I am in labor. What can the patient take with them to the hospital? They would like to take their cell phone. They would like to take things for the husband that are not for the wife, but things for the husband. My husband needs to eat. He needs his talis. He wants to bring his chumash and a whole bunch of other things. What could they put in this bag?
It's a good question. A lot of it depends on whether there's an eruv or not. If there's an eruv, so they can put whatever they want. As long as there's not muktzah, they can put whatever they want.
The cell phone's muktzah.
Oh, so the cell phone's muktzah. The cell phone's a very important thing. It is critical that you take your cell phone with you on your way to the hospital. If chas v'shalom something happens in the cab, or something goes wrong in transit, and you need to be able to phone a doctor, you need to be able to speak to a doctor to ask a medical question, you have to have that lifeline available. And therefore, it is absolutely integral that you take the cell phone with you to the hospital. Now, again, based on what they've already pre-registration, in the hospital, do they need their insurance card, or does the hospital already have their insurance card?
If I'm acquainted with the patient, it's already, all.
Let's say you may not make it. It's a quick one. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. You may come, you may not come.
Well, I also have patients who come from out of town for Yontif, and their families we're well acquainted with their families, and I end up taking care of them because they went into labor on Yontif. Right. There's a story of a family that asked me Erev Pesach if their grandchild was here from Lakewood, and if they go into labor, do you mind? And I said, absolutely not a problem. Shul started, let's say at 9 o'clock. By 9:15, the husband was tapping me on the shoulder. My wife is in labor.
So let's get out of here.
The whole shul saw me leave, and I was back by Musaf.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
So whether or not they need their insurance card, I think it is up to the hospital. If they can avoid it, great. I would imagine they need their ID. Can they get away with the ID?
They could get away with nothing. That's really the truth.
Okay, so the premise is if you can get away with nothing, so then you can get away with nothing. The truth is, it could be that the ID is not even muktzah. Your insurance card might not even be muktzah. Okay, but in terms of your phone, you bring your phone. Do you need a wallet? Do you need money? So there are some people who will never, ever, ever travel without money.
Today it's getting less and less.
Okay, so maybe a credit card, but fine. Other than that, the only other thing that you might need, which is muktzah, is a charger. If you're afraid that you're going to need the phone and you don't have enough things, you want to take the charger. The iPad, because they want to watch when they're recovering, they want to watch the show and that. So the iPad can wait. The husband can bring it Matzah Shabbos. You don't need pens and paper. That you don't need. The muktzah items really that we're talking about is a phone, maybe a charger, if it's necessary, and whatever critical documentation you would need to identify yourself at the hospital. Other than that, you can bring whatever you want that's not muktzah, assuming that there's an eruv.
Okay, so you packed up your bag, and now it's time to drive to the hospital. Most preferable Uber?
There's a machlokas about this. I'll share with you my.
Let me just give you the three choices. Uber, calling Hatzalah, which means that about 50 people will hear their radios will go off, or 100. I don't know how many Hatzalah members there are in the area. That means 100 people are picking up their communication device, whatever it is today, and that 3 or 4 people will be coming to your house in different cars. An ambulance will be coming and driving, and then obviously taking your own car. Those are our 3 choices of modes of transportation.
I think that number 1, you should take an Uber. An Uber is the best thing to take. Number 1, you don't have to handle any money. Everything is taken care of with the credit card in the program, in the application. Also, it gives you a picture. It tells you who's going to show up. So it tells you Muhammad's coming. So you can rest assured Muhammad's not Jewish. So you know that you're, that you are traveling with a guy. The only concern, people have brought this to my attention, is that when the Uber driver sees that there's a woman in active labor, he may decline the ride and drive away. They don't want a woman in labor in their car. Okay, they don't want a woman to go and to deliver in the back seat. Now, I've heard about these cases. I don't think that they are relevant or prevalent enough that we would say that you shouldn't rely on Uber. But if it happens and you don't have time, meaning at that point you tried the Uber route and you're cutting it close and your Uber driver just drove away. So now you could either call a new Uber and you have to wait, or you have to get in the car. So then you have to make I might have to make a game time decision. I'm not sure why calling Hatzalah has been, people call Hatzalah. I think it's a bad idea. People should not be calling Hatzalah. They don't need, unless there's some issue that you would need medical attention in transit and you need to go in an ambulance, or you need them because you really need to get there so fast and you need lights and sirens to get there. That's fine. But we're talking a standard case of going to the hospital. Hatzalah is not a taxi service. Yidden should not be your taxi service. They're going to have to go there. As you mentioned, 3 cars are going to come to the scene. They're going to put you in, and the bus and the ambulance. They're going to put you in the ambulance. You're going to drive. It's going to come back. It's not kedai. If you have to go to the hospital and Uber is not an option, no, a non-Jewish person is not an option, and you have to get there, then you have to go yourself. You have to drive yourself. When you're driving yourself, though, you have to remember that driving a car on Shabbos is a malacha d'oraisa. It's d'oraisa on Shabbos. That way, I don't know. I don't think you drive a Tesla. Last I checked, you don't drive a Tesla, Dr. Herman. Do you?
Nope. But
I seriously think that doctors should heavily consider switching to fully electronic cars. I am a full favor of. I'm very good at spending other people's money. Doctors who go on Shabbos should be driving electric cars because your whole driving is electric, and maybe it's only the Rabban.
So every time you step on the gas every time you step on the gas, it's an issue.
Yeah.
It's not just one issue, it's every time you step on the gas.
That's why someone in the chat, I don't know if it was to everyone or it was just to me, it was to me, in reference to the case where you drove that couple home. So someone pointed out correctly that even stopping to drop them off and putting your foot on the brake and then accelerating again would also be a problem. And that's he or she is correct.
So I have to take them to my house in my driveway the same way.
Or you take them to their destination and you walk to your house. Now, and the last thing, I once spoke to Rabbi Cohen about driving on Shabbos.
Right.
And about a certain person who had to go to the hospital. Fascinating shiloh for a different. He was working on the COVID vaccine, and he had to go on. He was working for a COVID antibody in Mount Sinai at the time where it was way before the vaccine. So he needed to work on Shabbos. So anyway, Reb David Paskin, he should drive with a shinoi. So I said, Reb David, driving with a shinoi, that's pikuach lev. That's who drives with a shinoi? You're gonna get into an accident, chas v'shalom. So he disagreed. He said, no, you could drive with a shinoi. People who know how to drive, they'll drive in a, okay. Anytime you could drive with a shinoi, I'm very nervous about it, but you have to be safe. But when you park the car, you have to be careful. What do you do when you park the car? Turning off the car is also keyboard. It's putting out the flame. So there, Rabbi Soloveitchik, my Rabbi held also from his father. I subsequently saw this in Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa, that leaving a car running is a sakana. To have a teenager, someone who's a nudnik, who sees a running car with no driver, all he has to do is smash the glass, open the car, open the door, and bam, he's holding a loaded gun. That's a sakana. It's like leaving a loaded gun on the sidewalk. So Rabbi Aaron held that you have to turn off the car. You turn off the car with the shinoi. But you have to be cognizant of driving on Shabbos. Once you get to the hospital, it's not so pashut that you could pull up and turn off the car. If you leave it running and let valet take it, that's good. But if you're going to park it, you have to make sure you turn off the car with the shinoi.
So our case is that this family has 3 children, 1-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 5-year-old, and it's 2:00 in the morning. And there's no next door neighbor. Are they allowed to put their children in the car with them and drop them off someplace else?
Absolutely. They have no choice. To leave the children unattended is a chol. Hold on one second. Someone wrote, I'm an GYN or David Cohen Paskin for me to drive with the shinoi. I can turn off the car, carry the keys, and drive home all with the shinoi. So it can be done. I personally, I'm not sure how to, whatever, maybe, I don't know how if you hold the wheel or you use the side of your foot, and it's really the side of your foot. The wheel is not relevant. It's use the side of your foot when you accelerate. Just be careful. Be careful.
Okay, and we already just mentioned passing, or I don't know if we did mention, on your drive to the hospital, if there is another hospital who delivers babies on the way, we did mention it for a second, going to the hospital that you're supposed to go to, even though it's additional distance.
Yeah, that's mother. So that you're comfortable with your doctor and your hospital, it's okay.
Okay, so I think we have so much more. I'm watching your time very closely. Why isn't it better to be induced during the week rather than going into labor on Shabbos?
Okay, this is going to be like we'll end off here. Maybe we'll start next time with all that induction. But there is a sefer, I forgot whether it's the sefer Hasidim or the sefer Charedim. Maybe it's the sefer Charedim holds that a person should actually daven that they shouldn't go into labor on Shabbos. Going to labor on Shabbos is a serious thing. I had 2. I had a Yontif and a Shabbos, or maybe I had one more also.
You had one on Tuesday morning, that I know.
So, there's so many shilas. There's so many shilas that come up from the transportation and getting there. You have the electricity. You have the electronic doors. You have this. I remember when I was in the hospital once, and now the bathrooms and all the rooms have all the lights, which are electronic and automatic and this and that. So it's a major, major issue to go to the hospital on Shabbos. That being said, it might be a major issue to induce, right? Rav Moshe Feinstein Paskin, that induction is a serious halachic issue. And again, we'll close with this, and maybe we'll open with this next time because there's so much to talk about induction.
Well, that's going to be a separate thing. We have so much more on Shabbos. We're going to continue our Shabbos discussion next time.
But just to bring it full circle, we started with the category of a woman who's a chola sheyesh b'sakana. So we'll bring it full circle. When a woman goes into labor naturally, so she becomes a yoledes. She becomes someone who's a chola sheyesh b'sakana. Now, who determined that she should be the chola sheyesh b'sakana? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He was the one that would determine at what point. But Moshe Feinstein is very upset with people who induce, thereby giving themselves the status of a chola sheyesh b'sakana. We know that we're not allowed to do anything risky. We're not allowed to put danger to ourselves, right? The Chamesh Chachma writes that Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, you can go back to Mitzrayim. All the people that wanted to kill you, they died. So now Hashem tells Moshe, now you can go to Mitzrayim. So the Meshech Chochmah says, you see, while they were alive, Hashem wouldn't allow Moshe to go back to Mitzrayim because people could kill him. Once that issue has been mitigated, now you can go back. So to induce, to give yourself the status of a chol sheyesh b'sakana, Rav Moshe holds is awesome. Now, certainly not. We're not talking about a case where it's medically indicated, but in a case where it's not medically indicated, to electively induce and give yourself that status of chol sheyesh b'sakana, that Rav Moshe says is awesome. So
and
there
that,
are opinions.
Yep, and that's better than maybe going into labor on Shabbos.
Yeah, on Shabbos that I deal with. I deal with the cards that I'm, the hand that I'm dealt, the cards that I'm dealt. What can I do? HaKadosh Baruch Hu had dealt me those cards.
Okay. So in my estimation, we accomplished one half of what we wanted to tonight. So we're going to do, next time we'll do Shabbos Part B. And then coming up, we have on our, very cognizant of our discussion on induction of labor, is going to soon follow, will be another, for me, one of my hottest topics will be induction of labor.
Great. Looking forward.
Okay, so one of the issues that we have is we don't know how to announce to everybody when our next time getting together, and we have the Yom Tovim coming into view. So when we do know, I'll send it out as early as I can, and hopefully everybody disseminates it. If you send me an email with who you are to jdherman@gmail.com, I'll keep it in a little file and hopefully let you know when the next ones coming up are.
Very good.
Good. Okay.
Okay,
So
everyone.
Good. If we don't see each other, to everybody who's here, have a good Yom Tov. Yom Tov is upon us, and don't go into labor on Shabbos. That's the bottom line. Good. Thank you all so much. Have a good night. Bye.